Welcome to Sayers and Secrets. When a high-profile banker is found dead in his office, door locked, lights dimmed, and an untouched glass of scotch at his elbow, his death raises more questions than grief. A shadow glimpsed on a security tape, a torn ledger page tucked behind a radiator, and a coded message inside a book on Renaissance finance point to a riddle only the dead man feared. But who was watching him? And why was he silenced before the truth surfaced? What would you do if the only witness left was a reflection? Let us know in the comments, and if stories of silent tension, sharp minds, and layered lies are your kind of puzzle. Subscribe and join our mystery circle. Pull your chair close to the fire, open your mind, and let the clues unfold. Chapter 1. A banker in the wrong light. Archie Goodwin here, and let me tell you, the day began with nothing more threatening than Fritz humming in the kitchen and Wolfe ensconced in his orchid rooms. A calm, civilized routine. The kind of thing Wolfe would happily preserve until the world ended. Naturally, that meant someone had to ruin it. At 11 sharp, the bell rang, and before I could finish making a note on the grocery accounts, in walked a banker. Or rather, he walked like one. Tall, tailored grey suit, gold cufflinks, the faint odor of starched money about him. He didn't introduce himself right away, just looked around the office as though checking if his deposit was safe. "Mr. Wolfe will be down shortly," I said, giving him my best don't-scuff-the-rug smile. "Meanwhile, you can tell me whether you're here to cash a check or bury one." That got me the banker's smile. Thin, polished, and about as warm as a vault door. "My name is Harland Vickers. I'm here on delicate business." Delicate business. That phrase can cover anything from a wife's affair to a missing million, but he said it with a weight that made me listen harder. I let him sit, watched him smooth his tie, and wondered what shadow was riding his shoulder. When Wolfe finally made his entrance, slowly, majestically, as though gravity worked differently on him, Vickers stood like a boy called to the headmaster's desk. Wolfe lowered himself into his chair, adjusted his yellow silk cravat, and eyed our visitor as if calculating interest. "Well," Wolfe said, his voice a slow roll of butter over a knife, "you have business. Speak." Vickers cleared his throat. "Mr. Wolfe, I am being followed." Now, you'd think a man like him would just hire 2 private guards and keep it quiet. But no. He claimed shadows had been tailing him for weeks. Men in dark coats at street corners, lights flicking across his office windows at night. He wanted protection, not from burglars, but from something subtler. "Protection?" Wolfe raised one brow. "I'm not a bodyguard, nor is Mr. Goodwin." "I know your reputation," Vickers insisted. His hands twitched, betraying the calm front. "This is not about a petty thief. Someone wants something buried in my past uncovered. I believe they'll stop at nothing." That made Wolfe's eyes half close. He doesn't stir for trifles, but a banker sweating over his shadowed past. That had flavor. "What precisely lurks in this past?" Wolfe asked. Vickers hesitated. Too long. Then he murmured, "A transaction. Years ago. Forgotten by most, but profitable to some. If exposed, it could ruin me. My family. My bank." I leaned against the desk, watching him. His face was calm again, but his knuckles had gone pale. He wasn't just scared. He was cornered. Wolfe tapped the arm of his chair. "And you fear these shadows will reveal this transaction?" "Yes, or worse." "Phooey," Wolfe muttered, though not dismissively. He closed his eyes as though sorting files in a private cabinet. That was when Vickers reached into his briefcase and laid an envelope on Wolfe's desk, thick, sealed, and with his name typed clean across the front. "What's that?" I asked. "My retainer," he said. $10,000. Cash Wolfe's lips twitched, which for him is practically a backflip. He didn't touch the envelope, just let it sit there like bait on a hook. The office went very quiet. The ticking of the wall clock seemed louder than usual. Wolfe finally opened his eyes, studying Vickers with that heavy-lidded stare that makes strong men sweat. "You are being followed, Mr. Vickers," Wolfe said at last, "but not merely by shadows, by something of your own making. I will consider your proposal." That word, consider, meant Wolfe wasn't saying yes, but he wasn't saying no either, which, in our line of work, is the equivalent of thunder on the horizon. Before I could push for details, the phone rang. I picked it up, and a voice on the other end said something that froze the air in my lungs. "Tell Wolfe," the voice rasped, "that if he touches Vickers' case, he'll regret it." Then the line went dead. I turned to Wolfe, still holding the receiver, and saw Vickers had gone pale as chalk. Wolfe simply reached for a beer from the side table, unscrewed the cap, and sipped. The banker's shadow had just passed our front door. Chapter 2. The Threat on the Line. When you pick up a phone and hear a voice promising regret, it does things to your nerves. My instinct was to bark something clever back, but the line went dead too quick for the repartee. I stood there with the receiver in my hand, staring at Wolfe, who was still sipping beer like we were discussing the weather forecast. "That was quick," I told him. "They've already marked us down for unpleasant consequences." "Bah," Wolfe said, putting the bottle down with deliberate care. "A voice on a telephone is vapor. We must deal in substance." Harland Vickers, our banker with the vault-like expression and the suddenly pale face, leaned forward in his chair. "Who was it? What did they say?" "Nothing printable," I said, setting the receiver back in its cradle. "Just that Wolfe shouldn't touch your case or he'll regret it. I assume you're used to people regretting your loans, but this has a sharper edge." Vickers' lips compressed. He wasn't used to being on the begging side of things. That much was clear. His hands were folded tight, one thumb digging into the other until I thought he'd draw blood. "I knew it," he said finally. "They're not content to haunt me. They want to drag others in. You must help me, Mr. Wolfe." Wolfe didn't reply right away. That was part of his technique. Silence that made the other man squirm. He leaned back, laced his fingers across the comfortable expanse of his stomach, and closed his eyes. To someone new, it looked like he was napping. To me, it was the prelude to battle. "Mr. Vickers," Wolfe said at last, "you expect me to intervene against nebulous pursuers, nameless and faceless, motivated by a deed you will not specify. I'm not disposed to be your custodian of secrets unless you choose to unseal them." That earned him a flash of panic across Vickers' eyes. Then the man clamped down again, retreating behind the banker's mask. "I cannot. Not yet. If I reveal too much, I give them what they want. I only need protection, discretion, surveillance, perhaps." "Surveillance is a street occupation," Wolfe said, shifting in his chair as though the word tasted sour. "Goodwin and my colleagues perform it as necessity dictates, but I do not squander my resources without cause. What, precisely, do these shadows want exposed?" Vickers looked at me, then back at Wolfe. "Alone, many years ago, to a man who did not repay in the usual manner. The matter was buried." That was vague enough to be useless, which was exactly how Vickers intended it. Wolfe gave him a look that could peel bark. Archie Goodwin, rule number 1. When Wolfe glares like that, it's your job to fill the silence. I leaned forward. "Let's make this simple, Mr. Vickers. Either you tell us what you did with this mysterious borrower, or we're as blind as you are. Without light, even shadows win." Vickers' jaw tightened. For a second, I thought he might spill. Instead, he rose from his chair and smoothed his coat. "I've placed my trust in you by coming here. The retainer is yours, whether you accept the case or not. But I must protect certain names until I'm sure." He glanced toward the envelope still lying fat and tempting on Wolfe's desk. Wolfe didn't so much twitch. Vickers lowered his voice. "I beg you, keep this confidential. If word spreads that I came here—" "Phooey," Wolfe said, eyes closing again. "The air in this room does not leak." Vickers nodded stiffly, gathered his hat, and walked out the way he had come, shoulders squared like he was marching into his own funeral. The door clicked behind him, and I exhaled. "Well," I said, "that was cozy. We've got a banker with a skeleton in his closet, shadows on his trail, and a warning from an anonymous well-wisher. What more could a detective ask?" "Information," Wolfe said. "Facts, not evasions." He rose, which meant business. Wolfe does not rise often, and when he does, the earth pays attention. He walked the length of the office, hands behind his back, face thunderous. "This man is in peril," Wolfe said, "not from idle pursuit, but from his own concealment. If he persists in withholding, the peril may consume him, and, if we are careless, us." "That's cheerful," I said. "Want me to tail him? See if these shadows show their faces." He nodded once. "Yes, but with caution. If they dare to threaten me, they are not amateurs." That settled, I phoned Saul Panzer. If New York had a league of shadows, Saul would be the one who already knew their phone numbers. He promised to keep an eye on Vickers' routes without being seen himself, which was as good as hiring an invisible man. Evening settled with the kind of stillness that only meant trouble was loading its revolver. Wolfe went upstairs to his orchids. I sat by the phone, half hoping it would stay quiet. It didn't. At 8 o'clock, the ring came again. I lifted it. This time there was no voice, just silence. Then a click. I frowned, put the receiver down, and jotted the time. A minute later, it rang again. Same silence, same click. Somebody was checking, testing. When Wolfe came for dinner, I told him. He only grunted. But when Fritz served squab with mushroom sauce, Wolfe barely touched it. That was my real warning signal. When the squab suffers, Wolfe is rattled. Around 9, Saul called in. His voice was low. "Archie, I've got something. Vickers left his bank after hours, headed down Lexington. 2 men followed, kept their distance but tight enough to keep him boxed. I tried all 3. They peeled near an alley by East 43rd. Vickers went in, only Vickers came out." "Meaning what?" I asked. "Meaning he walked into that alley with shadows and left alone. I checked. No sign of the other 2, like they vanished. But the look on his face, he knew it." I thanked him, hung up, and turned to Wolfe. "Well, boss, it looks like Mr. Banker is playing hide-and-seek with his own ghosts. 2 men follow him into an alley, and only he comes out. What do you make of that?" Wolfe scowled. "I believe that Mr. Vickers has ceased to control his narrative. We must act before the shadows become a corpse." I opened my mouth to ask how, but at that moment the doorbell rang again. I went to answer it, expecting Saul, or maybe Vickers, himself. What I found instead was a uniformed officer, cap pulled low, raincoat dripping. He handed me a card. "Detective Calloway, homicide." I blinked. We weren't expecting company. Calloway's eyes narrowed past me into the office. "Is Nero Wolfe in? There's been a murder. A man named Harland Vickers." Chapter 3. Murder in the Shadows. Detective Calloway had the kind of face you'd expect on a man who spent his career asking the same question. "Where were you last night?" His jaw was square, his mouth a permanent line, and his eyes gave you the impression that lying to him would be both easy and suicidal. He brushed past me into the office like a man who owned the deed. Wolfe was already seated, and if the interruption annoyed him, and of course it did, he hid it behind his usual fortress of composure. Fritz had barely cleared the plates from dinner, and Wolfe sat in his chair with his fingers steepled, looking like a Roman emperor deciding whether to grant mercy to a gladiator. "Detective Calloway," I said, closing the door. "If this is a social call, we're fresh out of coffee cake." Calloway's eyes flicked to me, then fixed on Wolfe. "Mr. Wolfe, I'll be direct. Harlan Vickers is dead." The words hit the room like an iron bar on the glass. I watched Wolfe carefully, but if he felt the shock, it didn't crack his surface. "Explain," Wolfe said, his tone as calm as a Sunday crossword. Calloway didn't need prompting. "About an hour ago, Vickers was found in an alley off East 43rd, single gunshot to the chest, wallet intact, watch untouched, not a robbery. Whoever wanted him dead wanted only him." I glanced at Wolfe. His eyes had narrowed a fraction, which in Wolfe's speak is the equivalent of a man gasping and clutching his chest. "Unfortunate," Wolfe said. "Unfortunate," Calloway repeated. "He came to see you today. He left that office shortly before his death. So I'll need statements, and I'll need honesty." "Honesty is not difficult," Wolfe replied, "if one restricts oneself to facts. Mr. Goodwin, your notes." Which was Wolfe's way of saying, "Archie, produce the memory reel." I gave Calloway a rundown of Vickers' visit, the complaint of being followed, the vague hints about a buried transaction, and the envelope of cash retainer. I even threw the anonymous phone call that warned us. Calloway listened, jotting in a small notebook. When I finished, he stared hard at Wolfe. "So he gave you money to protect him?" "He offered money," Wolfe corrected. "I had not accepted." Calloway closed the notebook. "Money, secrets, threats, and now a corpse. You'll forgive me if I consider Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin to be involved, whether or not you choose to admit it." That got a grunt from me. "Involved? We were sitting here enjoying squab while your corpse was being made. Unless you think Fritz did it, we've got alibis carved in stone." Calloway didn't smile. "You'll stay available, and you'll turn over that envelope." I looked at Wolfe. That was his call. Wolfe reached out, picked up the envelope, and with deliberate contempt, slid it across the desk. $10,000. Take it if you wish to confirm its reality, but it is mine as a retainer. Mr. Vickers is dead, but the obligation remains." Calloway opened the flap, saw the cash, and let out a low whistle. "Some retainer, for a man with nothing to say." He pocketed the envelope for evidence. I clenched my jaw, but Wolfe raised a finger at me, a silent order to hold my tongue. "Who else wanted Vickers dead?" Wolfe asked. "That's the million-dollar question," Calloway replied. "And if you know, you'll tell me. If not, stay out of my way, because if I find you meddling, I'll consider you part of the obstruction." With that cheerful farewell, he left, shutting the door with unnecessary force. I turned back to Wolfe. "Well, that's that. We've gone from a job offer to prime suspects in the space of 3 hours. Efficient." "Pfui," Wolfe muttered. "The man was murdered because of his secret. If we withdraw now, we yield both the money and our dignity. We cannot." "You mean we're in this, whether we like it or not?" "Yes." Wolfe pressed the tips of his fingers together. "We require context. Mr. Vickers hinted at a transaction, buried but not forgotten. Find it, and we find his killer." "Easier said than done," I said. "Banks bury more secrets than cemeteries." Wolfe opened his eyes fully. "Then we begin with the people. There will be associates, adversaries, beneficiaries. Locate them." That meant Archie Goodwin legwork, which is the part of my career that wears out my shoe leather while Wolfe sits serenely surrounded by orchids. I made a note to start with the bank itself. The next morning, I headed downtown to Vickers' territory, Crescent and Union Bank, a granite palace with steps wide enough to host a parade. The place reeked of money and the kind of polish that only comes from nervous tellers. I asked for the manager and was eventually shown to a man named Oliver Brandt. He was lean, sharp-featured, with a handshake that tried too hard. When I mentioned Vickers, his lips pinched. "Terrible business," he said. "We're all in shock. Mr. Vickers was respected." "And feared?" I asked. That got me a flicker of something behind his eyes. Bankers must command authority. He was no exception. "Any idea who'd want him dead?" Brandt's expression turned professional again, the shutters slamming down. "That's for the police. I cannot speculate." I left Brandt's office unconvinced. A man who insists he can't speculate usually has a dozen theories rattling around his head. In the lobby, I spotted another angle. Vickers' secretary. A young woman with tidy curls and a typewriter's calluses on her fingers. I introduced myself, mentioned Wolfe, and watched her eyes flicker nervously. "Mr. Vickers has been troubled lately," she admitted. "He worked late hours, kept files locked, and made phone calls from outside the building, as if he didn't trust anyone inside." "Any names?" I asked. She hesitated. "There was one. Mr. Caldwell. He visited last week. They argued. Loudly. Bingo. Name and potential suspect." I thanked her and made a note. Caldwell, whoever he was, had rattled the banker's composure. By noon I had two things: Brandt, the cagey manager, and Caldwell, the mysterious visitor. I reported back to the brownstone. Wolfe listened, eyes closed, while I laid it out. "Good," he said when I finished. "We have the beginnings of a circle. Brandt, Caldwell, and whoever benefited from the transaction. There will be more. We must widen the net." He reached for the phone and called Saul again, instructing him to discreetly investigate Caldwell. Then he leaned back, closing his eyes again. "Archie," he said, "prepare yourself. This is no longer a matter of shadows. It is a contest, and contests end only when one side collapses." As if to underline his words, the phone rang. I picked it up. A voice whispered, low and strained, "You don't know me, but I know who killed Vickers. Meet me tonight at 9 in Bryant Park. Alone." The line clicked dead before I could reply. I looked at Wolfe. "Well, boss, it looks like the shadows want to meet." And they picked me for the date. Chapter 4. A Whisper in the Park. If you've ever been summoned to Bryant Park after dark, you'll know it isn't the place for moonlit strolls or romantic sighs. It's shadows stacked on shadows, with just enough lamps to remind you that you're in New York and not in a gangster's dream. At 9 o'clock sharp, I was there, collar turned up, eyes open, hand not too far from the gun in my coat pocket. The call had been short, the voice strained, but the promise was bait Wolfe couldn't ignore. "I know who killed Vickers." That was enough to get me moving, though Wolfe had grumbled about the risk and Fritz had muttered something about his lamb stew going cold. Still, when the shadows beckon, Archie Goodwin answers. I'd arranged a casual setup. Stroll the park once, then pause at the fountain, the kind of spot where a nervous whistleblower might feel dramatic. The crowd was thin. Couples, loners, a few kids who thought they were tough. Nobody jumped out waving a confession. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I was about ready to call it a prank when I caught sight of him, a man lingering by the benches on the east side. Medium build, trench coat, hat pulled low. He gave me the look over, then crooked a finger. I moved slowly, not eager to spook him. "You called?" I asked, keeping my tone light. His eyes darted left and right. "Keep your voice down. They may be listening." "Friend, in this city everybody's listening. You'll have to be more specific." He swallowed. His face was pale under the brim, the kind of pale that comes from weeks of bad sleep. "I worked with Vickers. Years ago. I know what he did, and I know who feared him enough to kill him." That was promising, but I'd learned not to buy the package before checking the contents. "Names. Give me one." He shook his head. "Not here. Too dangerous. But you must understand. Vickers was no saint. He lent money where he shouldn't. He covered debts for people who couldn't afford to owe. When he threatened to reveal it, he signed his own death warrant. "Who are they?" I pressed. The man's hand trembled as he pulled an envelope from his coat. "This has details. Files. Keep it safe." I reached for it, but just as my fingers brushed the paper, a sound cracked through the night, a gunshot. Sharp, unmistakable, echoing off the buildings. The man jerked, staggered, and dropped the envelope. I caught him under the arm, but blood was already staining his shirt. People screamed in the distance, feet slapped against pavement, and shadows scattered like roaches. "Hold on," I told him, dragging him behind a bench. His lips moved, barely audible. "Caldwell, the file. Look." Then his eyes rolled back, and he slumped. I swore under my breath, scooped up the fallen envelope, and scanned the park. Whoever fired that shot was gone, blending into the night. 2 uniforms came running, guns drawn. I had a choice. Explain myself to the boys in blue or disappear before Calloway added "shooting witness in public park" to my resume. I chose the middle ground, waved them over, shouted, "Shooter went that way," and slipped into the crowd while they rushed to the dying man. When I returned to the brownstone, my heart was still pounding. Wolfe was in his chair, sipping beer, looking as if nothing on earth could disturb his digestion. I tossed the envelope onto his desk. "The park meeting didn't go so hot," I said. "1 gunshot, 1 corpse, and 1 envelope that better have more than coupons inside." Wolfe raised a brow, opened the flap with a paper knife, and pulled out the contents. A thin file of papers, creased and smudged. He unfolded the top sheet, adjusted his glasses, and grunted. "What is it?" I asked, leaning over his shoulder. "Correspondence," Wolfe murmured. "Letters from Harland Vickers to one Samuel Caldwell, dated 15 years ago. Discussion of a loan, large, unsecured, never repaid, and a threat of exposure." "Which explains the shouting match the secretary overheard," I said. "But why kill Vickers now, after all? These years?" Wolfe laid the papers flat, frowning. "Because, Archie, Vickers was no longer content with silence. He intended to leverage the past. Someone believed that killing him was preferable to paying him." "And the man in the park?" "He said Caldwell's name with his dying breath. That's as good as a finger pointed straight at him." "Perhaps," Wolfe said. "But dying declarations are not infallible. They may be misdirected. We must proceed with care." I sank into my chair, rubbing my temples. "So far, we've got 2 dead men, an angry manager, a secretary who knows more than she should, and a mystery Caldwell who's either our murderer or our scapegoat, and the police are breathing down our necks." Wolfe didn't reply. He was absorbed in the documents, eyes narrowing as he traced the typed lines. At last he spoke, softly but firmly. "These letters reveal more than debt. They reveal collusion. Caldwell was not merely a borrower. He was a partner, a scheme of laundering funds through false accounts. If exposed, it would ruin them both." "Which explains Vickers' terror," I said. "He was sitting on dynamite." "Exactly. And now the dynamite has exploded. Caldwell may be guilty, or he may not be alone." That word hung in the room. Alone, meaning there were more shadows lurking, more names buried in the past. The phone rang again, sharp and insistent. I picked it up. A familiar rasp greeted me. "You didn't listen," the voice said. "We told Wolfe not to touch Vickers' case. Now 1 more is dead. Back off. Or next time, it's you." The line went dead. I set the receiver down slowly, looking at Wolfe. He was watching me, his face unreadable. "Well," I said, forcing a grin I didn't feel. "At least they're polite enough to warn us." Wolfe's eyes glinted. "On the contrary, Archie. It was not a warning. It was an invitation." That was Wolfe's way of saying the game had just changed, and not in our favor. Chapter 5. Expanding the Circle. The next morning, New York looked the same as ever. Taxis honking, newsboys shouting, steam rising from grates. But I had the distinct feeling the shadows were multiplying. Fritz clanged around the kitchen with more noise than usual, which was his way of saying he didn't approve of his employer's latest dive into danger. Wolfe ignored it. He was in his chair, reading the file from the park with the intensity of a judge examining a death sentence. I sat across from him, coffee in hand, waiting for him to say something other than "Poor." When Wolfe finally looked up, the verdict was grim. "Archie, this Caldwell is significant. The letters indicate not just an unpaid loan, but complicity in a scheme that, if revealed, could discredit Crescent and Union Bank itself. Which means Brandt, our friendly manager, would have more than a passing interest in keeping it quiet." Wolfe nodded. "Brandt, Caldwell, perhaps others." Vickers threatened exposure. Thus he was silenced. "Then why shoot the man in the park?" I asked. "He was handing us evidence, not running to the cops." Wolfe's lips thinned. "Because he could not be allowed to live once he revealed his intent. His death was expedient." That was Wolfe at his cheeriest, logical, clinical, and with all the warmth of a morgue drawer. I set my coffee down and stood. "All right, we've got a banker, a manager, a secretary, and Caldwell, who looks guiltier by the minute. How do we separate fact from fog?" "By compelling disclosure," Wolfe said. "But before we summon, we must arm ourselves. Call Mr. Panzer." I rang Saul. He answered on the second ring, his voice as calm as ever. "If I ever get dragged into hell, I want Saul on my left side." He'd probably find a back door out before we smelled the brimstone. "Saul," I said, "we need Caldwell. Wolfe thinks he's carrying more dirt than a construction site. Find him. Find out everything. Address, movements, associates. What brand of cigars he smokes if necessary." "Got it," Saul said. "You want him shadowed? Like he's the last nickel in my pocket." "Consider it done." Saul hung up and I gave Wolfe the nod. He leaned back, closing his eyes. "Good. Now, Archie, visit the secretary again. There is more in her head than she revealed. Use your charm." That meant I got to pound pavement while Wolfe sat home communing with orchids. Typical. But charm is my department, so I headed downtown again, weaving through the morning rush until I reached Crescent and Union. Miss Everett, that was her name, looked surprised to see me. She was neater today, though the faint circles under her eyes suggested a rough night. "Mr. Goodwin," she said nervously, "the police have been here all morning. They asked me the same questions over and over." "I bet," I said, leaning on her desk. "But the thing about the police is, they're allergic to speculation. Lucky for you, I'm not." She looked around, lowered her voice. "I shouldn't say more. Mr. Brandt has warned us." "Miss Everett," I cut in, "2 men are dead. One was your employer. The other tried to save him. Both were silenced. If you sit on what you know, you might as well load the next bullet." That did it. Her eyes darted to the manager's office, then back. "Mr. Caldwell isn't just a client. He was close to Mr. Vickers. Business close. They covered for each other, and last week Mr. Caldwell threatened him." "Threatened how?" She swallowed. I only heard pieces. Something about ruining us all and no more silence. Mr. Vickers shouted back that he had proof. That's when Mr. Caldwell stormed out. "Did Brandt know?" "Of course. Mr. Brandt knows everything. He always does." I left her desk with a smile, but inside I was boiling. Vickers had dangled proof, Caldwell had snapped, and now we had 2 corpses to show for it. Back at the brownstone, I laid it all out for Wolfe. He listened, uninterrupted, then opened his eyes. "Satisfactory. The secretary confirms Caldwell's volatility. That strengthens suspicion, but we must corroborate. Panzer will bring more." As if on cue, the phone rang. I answered. Saul's voice came steady. Archie, I've got him. Caldwell lives uptown, a brownstone on 86th. He spends his mornings at the club, afternoons at the bank, evenings at a card table. No wife, no kids. One housekeeper, and, this is good, he met Vickers 3 times last month off the books. Neutral spots, cafes, diners, even a hotel lobby. Nice work, Saul. Keep him under your hat, but stick close. Will do. I relayed the news. Wolfe rubbed his chin, which meant his brain was shifting gears. Archie, prepare notes. Tomorrow evening we shall invite Mr. Brant, Miss Everett, and Mr. Caldwell here. They must confront one another. An office gathering already, I said. That's early for you. Usually you wait until at least 3 more bodies drop. This case requires acceleration, Wolfe replied curtly. Our adversaries are ruthless. Delay may cost us more. I was about to argue when the doorbell rang. Kramer hadn't shown yet, but I'd bet he was about due. I opened the door and, sure enough, Inspector Kramer stood there, cigar clenched, face red enough to light a fire hydrant. Goodwin, he barked, pushing past me. Where is Wolfe? In his chair, I said. Where else? Kramer stormed in, dropped into a seat, and jabbed his cigar like a weapon. What the devil are you pulling, Wolfe? First Vickers, now another stiff in Bryant Park, and both tied to you. Don't tell me you're just sitting this one out. Wolfe's eyes stayed shut. Inspector, I sit when it is useful. I move when it is necessary. At present, I'm considering it. Considering my foot, Kramer growled. The commissioner wants results. I don't care how you do it, but if you're holding back, I'll burn you. I stepped in. Relax, Kramer. Wolfe isn't holding back. We've got our noses in the same trail as you. Kramer glared at me. Then spit it out. Not yet, Wolfe interrupted. He opened his eyes, fixing Kramer with a stare that could freeze steam. Patience, Inspector. I will provide the killer, but on my terms. Kramer swore under his breath, stomped to the door, and flung it open. Your terms better include handcuffs, he snarled, and slammed it shut behind him. I turned back. That was friendly. You know he's going to shadow us until he gets something. Let him, Wolfe said. It will distract our enemies. The rest of the day passed in a kind of charged quiet. Wolfe reread the Caldwell letters. I kept notes, and Fritz clucked about the danger of serving dinner to a household marked for threats. When Saul called again near midnight, his report tightened the noose. Archie, Saul said, Caldwell isn't just a banker's parasite. He's been making payments, quiet ones, to Brant. Cash, no record. My guess, hush money. That was dynamite. I thanked Saul and passed it on. Wolfe finally allowed himself a satisfied sigh. Tomorrow, Archie, he said, we summon them. Caldwell, Brant, Miss Everett. The web is tightening. One will try to wriggle free, and in doing so, he will reveal the truth. I nodded, already picturing the office filled with suspects squirming under Wolfe's gaze. It was shaping up fast. Too fast, maybe. Because just as I reached for the light to end the night, the phone rang again. Wolfe's eyes snapped open. I answered. A calm, measured voice spoke. You're digging too deep, Goodwin. Stop now, or tomorrow morning you'll be reading your own obituary. Click. I set the receiver down slowly. Wolfe watched me. Well, boss, I said, trying for nonchalance. Looks like the shadows just graduated from warnings to death threats. And this time, they've penciled my name at the top of the list. Chapter 6. The Gathering at the Brownstone. The following evening, the Brownstone felt less like a house and more like a courtroom preparing for trial. Fritz had polished the silver tray for coffee service, but the way he banged cups on the saucers told me he wasn't thrilled about hosting a parade of potential murderers. Wolfe had arranged himself in his chair, looking like the presiding judge of Olympus, while I hovered by the globe, ready to pour if anyone's nerves got dry. We were expecting 3 visitors: Oliver Brant, the smooth-faced bank manager, Miss Everett, the secretary with a conscience, and Samuel Caldwell, the shadowy partner Vickers had quarreled with. Wolfe had sent out invitations, or summonses, depending on how you looked at it, and each had agreed to attend. That alone told me something. People guilty of nothing don't fear a conversation. People guilty of plenty think they can out-talk Wolfe. At 7 on the dot, the doorbell rang. The first to arrive was Brant. He stepped inside with a brisk air, hat under one arm, coat folded over the other. He looked around the office as if appraising a loan application, and I had to resist the urge to ring a bell and tell him his teller window was closed. "Mr. Wolfe," Brant said smoothly, extending a hand that Wolfe ignored. "You wish to see me?" "Sit," Wolfe commanded, not even glancing up from his beer. Brant blinked, then obeyed, folding himself into a chair with the controlled elegance of a man who didn't like being told what to do. 10 minutes later, Miss Everett arrived. She looked nervous, but determined, clutching a small handbag like a life preserver. Her eyes darted around the office, and when she saw Brant, she stiffened. I took her coat, gave her a reassuring smile, and steered her to a seat opposite him. Finally, at 7:30, the man of the hour showed. Samuel Caldwell was taller than I'd imagined, heavy in the shoulders, with a face that had been handsome once before years of worry and whiskey wore grooves into it. His suit was expensive but carelessly worn, his tie loose, his eyes sharp with irritation. He didn't wait for introductions. "What is this about, Wolfe? I don't like being summoned like a schoolboy." "Nevertheless," Wolfe said, finally deigning to open his eyes and study his quarry, "you're here. Sit." Caldwell scowled, but he sat. The stage was set. 3 suspects, Wolfe in his throne, me on standby, and enough tension to choke a rhinoceros. Wolfe leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Mr. Vickers," Wolfe began, "was murdered. You each had dealings with him. Financial, personal, professional. You are here because one of you profited by his death. I intend to discover which." That earned 3 different reactions: Brant's polite poker face, Miss Everett's gasp, and Caldwell's muttered curse. Wolfe continued, unbothered. "Mr. Brant," Wolfe said, "as manager, you had knowledge of Vickers's activities. Did you approve his loan to Mr. Caldwell?" Brant stiffened. "That was before my time." "Untrue," Wolfe said sharply. "The correspondence indicates your counter-signature on later transactions. You facilitated them." "Why?" Brant's lips thinned. "Banking is a business of discretion. Some accounts require special handling." "Or concealment," Wolfe replied. That jab hit home. Brant shifted in his seat, avoiding my gaze. Wolfe turned to Miss Everett. "You, madam, overheard arguments between Vickers and Caldwell. You testified to Goodwin that Vickers threatened exposure. Confirm it." Miss Everett's hands trembled around her handbag, but her voice was steady. "Yes, he said he had proof. Mr. Caldwell said it would ruin them all. He left furious." All eyes swung to Caldwell. He sneered. "So the girl listens at the doors? That proves nothing. Vickers was always making threats he never carried out." "But this time he carried them to Wolfe's office," I said, cutting in. "Letters, records, leverage. He had you by the throat, Caldwell." Caldwell slammed a fist on the armrest. "If you think I shot him, you're insane. Why would I walk into this circus if I had?" "Because you're arrogant," Wolfe said coolly. "Or because you believe you can outshout the truth." The room went silent. Brant glanced at Caldwell. Everett shrank in her seat, and I could almost hear Fritz clattering dishes in the kitchen like distant artillery. Wolfe took a long sip of beer before continuing. "Let us consider the motive. Mr. Vickers held proof of fraud. Fraud that involved Caldwell directly and Brant indirectly. If revealed, it would end both careers. Miss Everett, though privy to whispers, gained nothing from silence or exposure. That reduces our circle. Brant cleared his throat. I resent the implication. I have nothing to hide. Then explain the hush money, I said. That got his attention. What hush money? Caldwell's cash payments to you, I said, watching him squirm. No record, no receipts. Just quiet handoffs. Saul Panzer saw them. Brant flushed, then forced a laugh. Speculation, lies. I don't... Silence, Wolfe barked, louder than I'd heard in months. Brant snapped his mouth shut. Wolfe's eyes glowed like embers. You lie poorly, Mr. Brant, Wolfe said. I abhor it. Mr. Caldwell, you likewise evade. Miss Everett, you have been honest, and thus you may remain silent, but one of you men killed Vickers, and soon you will admit it. Before anyone could reply, the phone rang. I crossed and answered. The voice was female this time, low and urgent. Tell Wolfe to stop. If he calls the police with what he has, someone else will die tonight. Who is this? I demanded. But the line clicked dead. When I turned back, Wolfe was staring at me. Well, I relayed the words. Miss Everett went pale. Caldwell cursed again. Brant's hands clenched tight. Wolfe rose. A rare, volcanic motion. Enough. Leave, all of you. I shall summon you again when I'm ready. Caldwell stormed out first, muttering. Brant followed, stiff as a board. Miss Everett lingered, whispered, Be careful, then fled. When the door closed, Wolfe lowered himself heavily into his chair, eyes blazing. Archie, he said softly, they are desperate. They know I see through them. One of them, or someone behind them, is willing to kill again. We must move swiftly. Tomorrow, we tighten the noose. I nodded, though my stomach knotted, because in Wolfe's world, tightening the noose usually meant one of us standing directly under the trap door. Chapter 7. Caldwell's Shadow. The morning after the office gathering, Wolfe was back in his orchids by 9, leaving me the happy job of pounding the pavement. I'd learned long ago that when Wolfe rises from his chair, the world should tremble, but when he sends me out, it means the world should watch its pockets. Caldwell had been rattled last night. Red-faced, sweating, snapping at shadows. That's the kind of rattling that leaks secrets if you press in the right places. So Wolfe's instructions were simple. Follow Caldwell. Learn what he fears. Return with facts, not suppositions. So I set up camp outside his brownstone on 86th, parked in a borrowed sedan, courtesy of Saul Panzer. The street was quiet, trees rustling in the morning breeze, mothers herding kids to school, a milk truck clattering by. At 9:20 sharp, Caldwell emerged, shoulders hunched, coat collar up, hat low. He looked like a man hoping the world had forgotten his face. I tailed him at a healthy distance. He took a cab downtown, which made things easier. I hailed my own, instructed the driver to keep 2 cars back, and watched Caldwell's hat bob along the traffic line. He came out near Wall Street, not at the bank, but a block away, in front of a narrow building with frosted glass doors. The sign read, Sterling Club. Private, expensive, and as discreet as a confessional. Caldwell entered quickly, glancing behind him like a man checking for wolves. I slipped inside after a few minutes, flashing a confident grin that suggested I belonged. The lobby was thick carpet, leather chairs, and a clerk who looked like he'd seen every scandal in Manhattan and filed them alphabetically. "Members' entrance only, sir," he told me. I leaned in. Samuel Caldwell just came through. He asked me to join him. The clerk's eyebrows rose, but I held the look steady. After a beat, he nodded toward the lounge. Straight ahead. The lounge smelled of cigars and desperation. Men in tailored suits murmured in corners, sipping brandy at 10 in the morning. Caldwell sat near the window, head bent toward another man, stocky, middle-aged, with a face like a clenched fist. Their conversation was too low to hear, so I took a seat at a neighboring table and opened the morning paper, pretending to read. I caught pieces. Can't hold forever. Vickers was ready. If it leaks, Brandt's finished too. The fist-faced man muttered back. Caldwell's hand shook as he lifted his glass. When the waiter came, I ordered coffee and leaned back, ears tuned. Files not destroyed. Someone else has them. A woman. Caldwell's words cut clear for a second. That got my pulse ticking. A woman with files. That narrowed things. Miss Everett? Or another shadow we hadn't met yet? Before I could catch more, Caldwell stood abruptly, shook the man's hand, and strode out. The man lingered, lighting another cigar. I considered approaching, but blowing my cover wasn't in Wolfe's playbook. Instead, I tailed Caldwell again. This time, he went uptown, not to the bank, but to a townhouse in a quieter neighborhood. He rang the bell, and a woman opened the door. Tall, elegant, mid-40s, with sharp cheekbones and a stare that could cut glass. Caldwell stepped inside quickly. I scribbled the address and waited. 20 minutes later, he emerged, pale and sweating. He hurried away without a backward glance. The woman lingered at the window, watching him go. Then her eyes flicked toward the street, met mine, and narrowed. I tipped my hat and walked off casually, though my insides jolted. That wasn't Miss Everett. That was someone else entirely. Someone Caldwell feared. By late afternoon, I reported back. Wolfe was at his desk, tapping a pencil, which for him is like most men pacing the floor. Caldwell met a man at the Sterling Club, I told him. Conversation about files, Brandt, and a woman who has leverage. Then he went to a townhouse uptown, owned by a lady with enough ice in her stare to stock an Arctic expedition. He left sweating. Wolfe opened his eyes slowly. Describe her. I did. Wolfe grunted. Not Miss Everett. Correct. Someone else in the game. Precisely. That complicates matters. The woman may hold the missing files Vickers intended to wield. That makes her a target. Or an accomplice. Want me to pay her a visit? Not yet. We must identify her. Panzer can investigate discreetly. You will, for now, focus on Caldwell. He is unraveling. When a man unravels, he leaves threads behind. At that moment, the phone rang. I picked it up. Saul's voice came steady. Archie, you've got movement. Caldwell just bolted from his house again, headed downtown. Looks panicked. Keep on him, I said. An hour later, Saul called again. His tone was sharper. Archie, bad news. Caldwell ducked me near the river. I lost him for 5 minutes. When I picked up again, he was gone. Police boats are out. Rumor is, a man's body just washed up. I felt my stomach drop. Describe him. Tall, heavy build, Caldwell's suit. I hung up slowly and turned to Wolfe. His face was thunder. Caldwell is dead, I said. The room went silent. Wolfe closed his eyes, his mouth in a grim line. Fools. They silence every mouth that dares to speak. We are left with ghosts and fragments. Then who's next? I asked. As if in answer, the doorbell rang. I went to answer, half expecting Kramer with his cigar and temper. Instead, Miss Everett stood there, pale, trembling. Mr. Goodwin, she whispered, please, I can't keep quiet anymore. I know who's behind this. But if I tell you, I'm as good as dead. Chapter 8. The Secretary's Confession. When Miss Everett crossed our threshold that evening, she looked like a woman who had just stepped off the edge of a cliff and wasn't sure whether the ground below was rock or water. Her hands twisted her handbag like she was wringing a chicken's neck. I ushered her inside before any neighbor could see, guided her into a chair opposite Wolfe, and signaled Fritz for coffee. Wolfe, of course, did not rise. He sat in his chair, gazing at her with the patience of a cat watching a bird that might fly into his paw at any moment. Miss Everett, he said, his tone gentle but firm, you claimed knowledge that imperils your life. Speak. She glanced at me, then back at him. I don't know where to begin. Begin, Wolfe said, at the point where Mr. Vickers ceased to trust those around him. Her lips pressed together, then parted. It started months ago. Mr. Vickers received letters, anonymous at first. They hinted at the past, at deals he made, accounts he opened that weren't in the bank's records. He dismissed them, but then one arrived with copies of the old ledgers. Proof. That's when he grew frightened. Proof of what, precisely? Wolfe asked. She swallowed. That he and Mr. Caldwell had created shell accounts. They funneled money through names that didn't exist. It was supposed to be temporary, but it went on for years. Eventually, the balances were shifted, buried, disguised. Millions, perhaps. If uncovered, the bank's reputation would collapse. I whistled low. That's not just a skeleton in the closet. That's a graveyard. Her hands trembled on her bag. Mr. Brandt discovered it, or part of it. Instead of exposing them, he cooperated. He received payments regularly to keep quiet. Which Panzer confirmed, Wolfe murmured. Miss Everett nodded. Yes, but Mr. Vickers grew restless. He said it was eating him alive. He wanted out. He planned to force Caldwell to take responsibility. To confess, perhaps. But Caldwell refused. They argued. Mr. Vickers threatened to go public. And then she broke off, covering her face with her hands. Then, Wolfe said softly. He was silenced. She nodded, shoulders shaking. And Caldwell, too. They're destroying everyone who knows. I leaned forward. What about the woman? Tall, sharp, mid-40s, expensive house uptown. Caldwell visited her yesterday, left looking like he'd seen his own obituary. Miss Everett's eyes widened. You saw her? Yeah. Who is she? Miss Everett hesitated, then whispered, Her name is Margaret Harwood. She was Mr. Vickers' associate. Years ago, she was a junior partner in the bank's investment division. She left suddenly after something went wrong. I think she has the files. The ledgers. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. Ah, the custodian of truth. Miss Harwood preserved what they wished to destroy. She hated them, Miss Everett continued. She swore they ruined her career. If she still has the records, she could bring them all down. I sat back, letting that sink in. So now we've got our lineup clear. Brandt, who took hush money. Caldwell, who played with ghost accounts until someone cut his string. And Margaret Harwood holding the receipts. If Vickers was ready to expose it, she either helped him or killed him to keep the power to herself. Miss Everett shivered. She's dangerous. More dangerous than the others. She knows things. If she realizes you're after her... Pfui, Wolfe interrupted, his voice sharp enough to snap glass. Danger is relative. We require confirmation. Miss Everett, you have been frank. Continue thus. You must provide names, dates, details. And she did. For the next hour, she poured out a stream of details. Late-night phone calls, shredded papers in Vickers' bin, Brandt's unexplained absences, Caldwell's desperate meetings. She remembered small things, too. A ledger with initials MH in the margin, a torn note that read, destroy copies, a phone call Vickers made to Harwood that ended in shouting. Wolfe listened with closed eyes, filing it away in whatever vault sits inside his skull. I took notes, trying to keep up. By the time she finished, her voice was raw, her hands steadying at last, as though confession had bled out the poison. Wolfe opened his eyes. You have been useful, Miss Everett, but you must be cautious. Whoever silenced Vickers and Caldwell may now turn to you. Her face went white. Then what should I do? You will remain under observation, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin will arrange it. Saul Panzer will ensure your safety until further notice. I nodded. Consider yourself shadowed by the best in the business. She gave a weak smile of gratitude. I escorted her to the door, where Saul himself was waiting in the shadows of the stoop. I briefed him quickly. He nodded, then melted away with Miss Everett like a shadow taking form. When I returned, Wolfe was leaning back, eyes half closed, lips pursed in thought. "Well," I said, "we've got the picture now. Fraud, hush money, betrayal, and a woman with a file cabinet full of dynamite. The question is, did Harwood light the match, or is she saving it for later?" "That," Wolfe said, "is what we must ascertain. She may be a blackmailer, a whistleblower, or the murderer herself. Until we know, we cannot resolve the pattern." I poured myself a drink and dropped into the red chair. "What's the next move? Pay Harwood a visit?" "Not yet," Wolfe said. "Direct confrontation without preparation would be folly. First, we must learn what she intends to do with her knowledge. Does she seek money, revenge, or silence? Only then may we compel her." The clock ticked. Fritz clinked dishes in the kitchen. Wolfe stared at the ceiling like it might spell out the answers. Then, as if remembering something, he spoke again. "Archie, tomorrow morning you will approach Miss Harwood. Discreetly. Gauge her temperament. Do not reveal Miss Everett's confession. Instead, imply that we know more than we do. Observe her reaction." I sighed. "As usual, you want me to poke the hornet's nest and see which way they fly." "Precisely," Wolfe said. That night, I slept light, with dreams of faceless men and whispering shadows. When morning came, I polished my shoes, straightened my tie, and headed uptown. Margaret Harwood's townhouse looked the same in daylight, elegant, cold, unyielding. I rang the bell. She answered herself, wearing a silk blouse and pearls, her eyes as sharp as broken glass. "Yes," she said coolly. "Archie Goodwin," I told her. "I work with Nero Wolfe. We need to talk." Her lips curved, not into a smile, but something colder. "Ah, Mr. Wolfe's errand boy. I wondered how long it would take." That stopped me cold. She knew who I was. She'd been expecting me. "Come in," she said. "Since you're here, we might as well speak plainly." I stepped inside, every nerve humming. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. Files were stacked neatly on a side table. She noticed me glancing at them and laughed, low and sharp. "You're here for the ledgers, aren't you?" she said. "The files Vickers died for." "Maybe," I said, keeping it casual. "Depends on what you plan to do with them." She stepped closer, her eyes boring into mine. "That depends on you, Mr. Goodwin. Tell Wolfe this. I know exactly who killed Vickers, and if he pushes me, I'll make sure the world knows too. But if he cooperates—" She tapped the files. "We might strike a bargain." That was when the front window shattered. A shot rang out, splintering the frame inches from her head. She didn't flinch. She just smiled thinly. "Ah," she said softly. "It seems someone doesn't want me talking." Chapter 9. Bullets through glass. The crack of the shot still rang in my ears when Margaret Harwood turned to me with that unnerving calm of hers. "I've seen a lot of people duck when bullets start flying." She didn't. She just lifted her chin, dusted a sliver of glass off her blouse, and said, "You see, Mr. Goodwin, they're very eager that I keep quiet." I was less philosophical. I shoved her toward the floor, yanked my revolver out, and ducked toward the shattered window. The street outside was already shifting, pedestrians screaming, a car engine revving. I caught the tail end of a dark sedan roaring off, tires squealing. The license plate was smeared with mud, either by accident or design. When I got out the door, the sedan was gone. The street was nothing but startled onlookers and glass crunching under my shoes. I swore, turned back inside, and found Harwood pouring herself a drink from a crystal decanter as though this was just another Wednesday. "You're awfully composed for someone who nearly lost her head," I told her. Her eyes glittered. "Mr. Goodwin, if you live long enough with secrets, You learn not to flinch when they bite. She handed me a glass. You might need this more than I do. I set it aside. Never mind philosophy. Someone just tried to kill you, lady. That makes you more valuable or dangerous than we thought. Which is it? She sipped, unhurried. Valuable, certainly. Dangerous, only to those who deserve it. Vickers thought he could hold the past over us. Caldwell believed he could deny it. Now they're both dead. I still live because I don't play in denial. Her words slithered around the room like smoke. I wanted to pin her down, but she had that habit Wolfe does. Answering without answering, leaving you with more knots than you started with. Who killed them? I asked flatly. She tilted her head. I told you, I know, but information has a price. If Wolfe wants names, he'll have to bargain. That bargain just got more complicated, I said, jerking a thumb toward the window. Somebody thinks you're already talking. She smiled thinly. Then perhaps you should keep me alive long enough for Wolfe to decide what I'm worth. That was my cue to get her out before the sedan circled back for round 2. I called Saul Panza, explained the situation. Within 20 minutes, Saul arrived, blending into the townhouse like he'd been born in the wallpaper. She stays under your watch, I told him. Don't let her breathe without you knowing about it. Harwood arched his brow. Am I under protection or arrest? Depends on how long you keep playing coy, I said. Leaving her in Saul's capable hands, I headed back to the brownstone. When I walked in, Wolfe was where I'd left him, chair, beer, expression like a man forced to endure eternity. I gave him the play-by-play, the shattered window, the fleeing sedan, Harwood's calm revelation that she knew the killer. Wolfe listened with his eyes shut, nodding once when I finished. As expected, he murmured. Expected. Boss, you couldn't have predicted a drive-by in her parlor. Phooey, not the manner, the intent. Anyone with files implicating Brandt and Caldwell was bound to be targeted. The attempt confirms her possession, which confirms her relevance. I dropped into the red chair. She claims she knows the killer, says you'll have to bargain for the name. Wolfe opened his eyes, their weight pressing down like anvils. She overestimates her leverage. If she is the custodian of truth, then she requires me more than I do her. Protection is her currency. Confession will purchase it. You plan to squeeze her? Precisely, but delicately. A blunt demand will silence her. Instead, we must draw out her story, align it with Miss Everett's confession, and expose contradictions. Then she will speak, to preserve herself. The phone rang then. I picked it up. It was Inspector Kramer, voice hot enough to fry bacon. Goodwin, what the hell are you people doing? I've got reports of shots fired uptown. Witnesses saw you running in and out of a townhouse, and now my men are asking if Wolfe's turned vigilante. Relax, Inspector, I said. We were targets, not shooters. And if your men want to catch the sedan, they'd better start scraping mud off license plates. Don't get smart, Kramer barked. I want Wolfe in my office tomorrow. If he's holding back again, I'll make sure he regrets it. He hung up before I could respond. I relayed the news. Wolfe only snorted. Kramer, Wolfe muttered, is a man who confuses volume with victory. Yeah, I said. But he's also a man who can make our lives miserable if he thinks we're stonewalling. Wolfe waved it away. He will fume, as always. What matters is this. Miss Harwood. She knows. But what does she know? We must discover whether she observed the act, orchestrated it, or merely inferred it from her files. Only then can we act. Fritz brought a tray, cornbread, trout, and butter. Wolfe dug in, but I could tell his appetite was more duty than pleasure. That's when I knew things were tightening. When Wolfe eats with less gusto, the noose is near. By midnight, Saul called in. Archie, She's calm, too calm. She says she's waiting for Wolfe to invite her. She wants her audience. Keep her breathing, Saul. She's bait on a hook. The next morning, I convinced Wolfe to act. Boss, we can't sit forever. Brant's hiding, Everett's trembling, Caldwell's floating down river, and Harwood sipping scotch behind Saul's shadow. If we don't pull the trigger soon, someone else will. Wolfe sighed, wiped butter from his lips, and finally said, Very well. Tomorrow evening, bring them all. Brant, Everett, Harwood, even Kramer if he insists. The circle must close. That was music to my ears. The classic Wolfe office gathering. I could already picture it. Suspects lined up like schoolchildren, Wolfe dissecting them with words sharper than knives. But fate decided not to wait tomorrow. That evening, as I was filing notes, the phone rang again. I answered. A man's voice, low and urgent, spoke 3 words before the line went dead. Harwood is next. I turned slowly toward Wolfe. He was watching me, eyes narrow. Well, I said, looks like we've got less than 24 hours before our key witness becomes another obituary. Chapter 10. The circle in Wolfe's office. The next evening, the brownstone felt less like home and more like an execution chamber waiting for the rope to drop. Wolfe had ordered Fritz to set out chairs in a precise semicircle. He sat, immense and immovable, in his own chair, as if carved there from granite. I had polished the globe, checked the lock on the door, and prepared myself for fireworks. At 7 sharp, the bell rang. First through the door was Inspector Kramer, a cigar clamped between his teeth like it had personally offended him. He glared at me, stomped past, and dropped into the chair farthest from Wolfe. This had better not be another circus, he growled. On the contrary, Inspector, Wolfe said, this will be theatre, with a conclusion. At 7:30, Oliver Brant arrived. His expression was as stiff as his collar. He offered a curt nod to Wolfe and Kramer, then sat down, folding his hands as if he were at a shareholders' meeting. Miss Everett came next, pale and trembling, eyes darting everywhere but at Brant. I guided her to her chair and gave her a quiet, "Don't worry, you're in the safest place in Manhattan." Judging by her shaky smile, she wasn't buying it. Finally, Saul escorted Margaret Harwood through the door. She looked cool as an ice sculpture, her pearls gleaming under the light. She took her seat without a word, but her eyes roamed the room, weighing every man present like cards in a hand she planned to play. The cast was assembled. Wolfe waited until the silence thickened, then began. "Mr. Vickers is dead," he said, his voice rolling slowly and deliberately. "So is Mr. Caldwell, each silenced because of knowledge that threatened others in this room. The pattern is clear. We are no longer sifting rumors. We are identifying a murderer." Kramer snorted. "If you know who it is, Wolfe, spit it out. If not, stop wasting my time." Wolfe ignored him. He turned his gaze to Brant. "You, sir, accepted hush money from Caldwell. Payments witnessed by my agent. You claim innocence, but you are complicit." "Why?" Brant's jaw tightened. "I had no choice. Caldwell, he threatened me. If I refused, he said he'd drag me into the scandal. I took the money to keep him quiet." "Cowardice masquerading as pragmatism," Wolfe said. "Nevertheless, it proves motive." Brant's face flushed. He glanced at Harwood, who sat expressionless. "Miss Everett," Wolfe continued, "you overheard quarrels, you observed fear, you witnessed Vickers preparing to expose the scheme. Your testimony confirms the tension that preceded his death. You are not under suspicion, but you are a witness." She nodded, voice barely audible. "Yes." "And you?" Ms. Harwood Wolfe's eyes fixed on her. "You preserved the files. You hold evidence of fraud. You claim to know the killer, yet you barter knowledge for safety." "Why?" Harwood smiled, slow and sharp. "Because knowledge is power, Mr. Wolfe, and I have no intention of surrendering mine cheaply." Kramer slammed his fist on the armrest. Enough games. If she knows, she will tell us now. Wolfe raised a finger, silencing him. Patience, Inspector. Truth emerges under pressure. He leaned forward, voice low and dangerous. Vickers was killed because he intended to reveal the past. Caldwell was killed because he might have revealed more. That leaves two possibilities. Mr. Brandt, desperate to protect the bank, or Ms. Harwood, desperate to protect her leverage. The room crackled with tension. Brandt opened his mouth, but Harwood spoke first. Ridiculous, she said smoothly. Why would I destroy the very leverage I hold? With Vickers alive, I had an ally. With him dead, I stand alone. His death benefited me the least. Unless, Wolfe said, you feared he would expose the fraud before you could control the narrative. If so, his silence was to your advantage. Her eyes narrowed. Careful, Mr. Wolfe. Accusations without proof are dangerous. Proof, Wolfe thundered, louder than usual. Phooey. I have testimony, evidence, and logic. Proof is merely confirmation of the inevitable. At that moment, the phone rang. I jumped, then answered. A voice hissed, She's lying. Harwood killed him. Look at the files. The handwriting is hers. Then the line went dead. The room froze. All eyes swung to Harwood. She didn't flinch. She simply arched her brow and said, Convenient, isn't it? A phantom caller condemns me while I sit here in plain view. How neat. Kramer leapt to his feet. That's it. Wolfe, either you give me something solid, or I drag the lot of them down to headquarters and sweat it out the old-fashioned way. Sit down, Inspector, Wolfe said coldly. You will have your murderer, but not by bluster, by deduction. Brandt suddenly rose, his face blotchy. I've had enough. This is absurd. You can't keep us here against our will. I moved toward him, but Wolfe's voice lashed out. Sit, sir. If you leave now, you condemn yourself. Brandt faltered, then dropped back into his chair, sweat shining on his temples. Wolfe's eyes swept the room. Ladies and gentlemen, the net is closing. The killer sits among us, and before this night is through, I shall name them. The words hung heavy. Miss Everett gasped. Brandt clenched his fists. Harwood's lips curved in the faintest smile. Then, without warning, the lights flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed the office. A chair scraped, a woman screamed, and in the blackness I heard the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. Chapter 11. Darkness in the office. When the lights dimmed, the brownstone became a cavern of noise and nerves. The scream still echoed in my ears as I shoved away from the globe, hand going instinctively for the revolver at my side. Somewhere in the blackness, a chair tipped over. Then came the click, sharp, metallic, of a gun being cocked. Don't move, a voice barked. Male, tense, maybe Brandt, maybe someone else. I froze, crouching low, eyes straining in the dark. I couldn't see Wolfe, but I could picture him in his chair, massive and immovable, lips curling with contempt, even in pitch black. Pway, his voice cut through the room like a blade. An amateur display? Do you intend to murder me in my own office, sir? Shut up, the voice snapped. I edged sideways, trying to place the sound. A faint scuffle came from the left. Miss Everett sobbing, maybe. Kramer's cigar sparked faintly as he cursed, which gave me a reference point. Harwood was silent, which was louder than any scream. Archie, Wolfe said calmly. The fuse box. Working on it, I muttered, sliding toward the hall door. Whoever had the gun didn't fire, which meant they were bluffing or cautious. Either way, it gave me room. I slipped into the hall, groped along the wall, and found the fuse box by memory. A quick flick, and light blazed back. The sight froze the room. Oliver Brandt stood in the middle, gun in hand, sweat pouring down his face. Miss Everett was pressed against the wall, eyes wide. Harwood sat perfectly composed, one eyebrow arched. Kramer was on his feet, fury in every muscle. "Drop it, Brandt!" Kramer barked, pulling his own revolver. Brandt hesitated, then lowered the weapon slowly. I crossed and plucked it from his hand before Kramer put a hole through him. "Sit," I told him. He collapsed into a chair, face pale as chalk. "Well, Inspector?" Wolfe asked mildly. "Do you wish to arrest him now, or will you wait for me to confirm whether he is indeed our murderer?" Kramer's eyes burned. "If it were up to me, I'd haul him in this second. But go ahead, Wolfe. Spin your web." Brandt's voice cracked. I only wanted to scare her." He jerked his head toward Harwood. "She has the files. She'll destroy the bank. I had to stop her." "By darkness and a gun?" Wolfe's tone was scathing. "You're a fool, Mr. Brandt, but perhaps not a killer. Bluff and bluster are the refuge of men without resolve." Harwood's lips curved in a cold smile. "You see, gentlemen, panic. He was always weak. He could never kill." Brandt shot her a look of pure hatred. "You witch, you've been pulling the strings all along." "That," Wolfe interrupted, "remains to be seen." The room was taut as piano wire. Miss Everett dabbed at her eyes, still shaking. Brandt slumped, defeated. Harwood sat serene, too serene. And Kramer paced like a caged bull. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Consider the facts. Vickers was silenced after threatening exposure. Caldwell was silenced after refusing to yield. Now, Miss Harwood is attacked by a bullet, and here, in my office, an attempted intimidation. Each act benefits someone who fears revelation." He opened his eyes wide. "But who truly benefits? Not Miss Everett, who gains nothing. Not Brandt, who merely concealed for profit but lacks the steel for murder. Not even Miss Harwood, who thrives on secrets, not corpses. No, the killer is someone who required Vickers dead to preserve not money but survival." Kramer barked, "Who, Wolfe?" "Enough riddles." Wolfe leaned forward. "Patience, Inspector. Tonight you will have your name. But first, I require the files Miss Harwood possesses." Harwood laughed lightly. "And if I refuse?" "Then," Wolfe said, "you condemn yourself." The silence after that was thick. Harwood's eyes glittered, but she said nothing. Finally, she rose, reached into her bag and pulled out a folded packet. She laid it on Wolfe's desk. "Very well, but remember, Mr. Wolfe, some truths cut deeper than bullets." I stepped forward, ready to secure the packet, when the phone rang again. I grabbed it. The voice on the other end was a rasp I'd heard before. The anonymous caller. "You're close, Goodwin, too close. If Wolfe reads those files, you won't live to hear the end of it." Click. I turned slowly. "Boss," I said, "our friend on the line just promised we're all dead if we open this packet." Wolfe tapped the file, unfazed. "Then we must, Archie, for therein lies the killer's shadow." He adjusted his cravat, raised his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow evening you will all return here. I shall reveal the murderer. Until then, Saul Panzer will guard Miss Harwood, and Inspector Kramer will restrain his bluster. Archie, secure the packet." Kramer exploded. "Tomorrow? Are you insane? You've got a man with a gun, a packet of evidence, and you're telling me to wait?" "Yes," Wolfe said firmly, "because the killer will betray themselves before then." I picked up the packet, feeling the weight of more than just paper. Harwood smiled faintly. Brandt stared at the floor, and Everett looked like she might faint. Then, from outside, a shot cracked through the night. The office window shattered again. The packet flew from my hand as instinct made me duck. When the glass settled, the packet was gone. Someone had snatched it through the broken window. Chapter 12. The Vanished Files. The sound of that shot hadn't finished echoing before I was on the floor, shards of glass tinkling down around me. My hand groped for the packet, but the space on the rug where it had fallen was as empty as a bank vault on Sunday. Whoever had fired the shot hadn't been aiming for Wolfe or me. They'd been aiming for the evidence, and they'd gotten it. "Archie," Wolfe's voice was sharp. "The window." I scrambled up and lunged, sticking my head out into the night air. The street was quiet, shadows deep, and the only sign of life was a dark figure darting around the corner toward 9th Avenue. I vaulted over the sill before Wolfe could bark a warning and hit the pavement running. The figure was fast, but I had adrenaline on my side. I tore down the block, heart hammering, revolver heavy in my pocket. As I rounded the corner, I caught a glimpse. Tall, broad-shouldered, hat pulled low, clutching something under his arm. The packet. "Hey!" I shouted and pounded after him. He bolted across 9th, weaving through honking cars. I followed, ignoring curses and brakes screeching behind me. He ducked into an alley, shadows swallowing him whole. I slowed, gun drawn now, ears straining. A can clattered somewhere ahead. Then silence. I edged forward. The alley smelled of garbage and damp brick. I caught a flicker of movement, and then the figure lunged, slamming me against the wall. Pain shot through my shoulder. I swung back hard, connecting with a jaw. The man grunted, staggered, but didn't fall. We grappled in the dark, fists thudding, boots scraping. He was strong, stronger than I'd expected, but desperation lent me an edge. I drove my knee up, twisted, and finally tore the packet from his grasp. He cursed, shoved me back, and vanished deeper into the alley before I could steady my aim. By the time I fired a warning shot, he was gone. The echo bounced at me like mockery. I stood there, panting, the packet clutched tight in my hand, blood trickling from a cut on my temple. Whoever he was, he hadn't wanted to kill me, only keep the files. But I'd won this round at least. Back at the brownstone, Kramer was redder than a boiled lobster, barking orders at the uniforms who had arrived after the ruckus. Miss Everett was crying softly. Harwood sat stone-faced, and Brant looked like he wanted to melt into the wallpaper. Wolfe, of course, hadn't moved an inch. I dropped the battered packet onto his desk. "Well, boss, they tried. But unless this thing is stuffed with blank paper, we've still got our ace." Wolfe's eyes flicked open, and for once there was something almost like relief in them. He untied the string, spread the papers out, and began scanning. His lips pursed, his fingers drummed, and I could practically see the machinery turning behind his forehead. Kramer loomed. "Well, what's in there?" "Corruption," Wolfe said simply. "Proof of the shell accounts, transfers between false names, signatures, Vickers, Caldwell, and Brant, and marginalia in Miss Harwood's hand." Harwood stiffened, but Wolfe raised a finger. "Do not protest, madam. It proves involvement, not guilt of murder. For that, we need more." Kramer growled. "Then when, Wolfe? How many more bodies before you stop philosophizing?" Wolfe glared. "Tomorrow evening, they will all return, and then, Inspector, you will have your murderer." Kramer stormed out, swearing. The uniforms trailed after him, leaving us with our uneasy trio. Wolfe gestured imperiously. "You may go. Return tomorrow. If you flee, you condemn yourself. Archie, see them out." I did, though it took some nudging to get Brant moving. Harwood slipped like a queen, Everett like a rabbit chased by dogs. When the door shut, silence fell heavy. I turned to Wolfe. "So? You've got the files. You've got the names. What's the holdup?" Wolfe leaned back, closing his eyes. "Because, Archie, the files alone do not tell us who fired the bullets. They tell us who cheated, who concealed, who profited. But they do not tell us who killed." "And you know," I pressed. He opened his eyes, their weight pinning me. "I know. But knowledge must be displayed at the proper time. Tomorrow, when they are all here, I shall demonstrate. Until then, we must guard this packet." "Guard it? After tonight, they'll try again. We might as well hang a sign on the door. Free ledgers, inquire within." "Nevertheless," Wolfe said, "the packet remains here." Fritz will triple bolt the doors. You will keep watch, and I shall consider my words." I sighed, poured myself a stiff drink, and sat down. Guard duty in the brownstone wasn't the worst gig, but tonight the shadows felt closer, thicker. At 2 a.m. the phone rang. I grabbed it before it woke Wolfe. A whisper slithered through the line. "You should have let him keep the files, Goodwin. Now you'll pay for it." Click. I set the receiver down, jaw tight. The threats were piling up like unpaid bills. By morning, the city felt colder. Saul checked in, reporting no tale on Harwood. Miss Everett had gone to ground. Brant had locked himself in his apartment. The calm before the storm. At lunch, Wolfe finally spoke. "Archie, tonight is the culmination. All threads lead here. Our murderer has revealed themselves, not by deed, but by contradiction. They betrayed themselves in my office yesterday. And you're going to lay it out tomorrow night?" "Yes." He closed his eyes again, lips curling in something almost like satisfaction. "It will be conclusive." That evening, as Fritz set the table, the bell rang again. Expecting Saul, I opened the door. Instead, I found a plain envelope on the stoop. No name, no return address. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, "Call off tomorrow night. If Wolfe speaks, he dies." Chapter 13. Wolfe's verbal verdict. By 6 that evening, the brownstone had the hush of a cathedral before a heresy trial. Fritz laid out cups. I checked the window glass that hadn't been replaced yet and decided to leave it jagged. Anyone trying another snatch and grab was going to meet the harsh hand of architecture. Wolfe sat heavy in his chair, eyes half closed, lips pursed. If you think that means he was calm, you don't know him. He was loaded, primered, and waiting for a match. At 7 sharp, they came. Brant first, grey as the granite his bank was carved from. He kept a tight hold on his hat like it might testify against him. Miss Everett next, pale and pinched, hands worried to the bone around her handbag. Harwood last, pearls gleaming, posture like a verdict. Inspector Kramer shouldered in behind them, cigar lit like a fuse. "All right, Wolfe," he said, dropping into a chair. "I did my patience. Now you do your proof, and if anyone points a gun, I'll ventilate them with my compliments." "No one will point a gun," Wolfe said. "Not tonight." I closed and bolted the door. Saul Panzer was stationed outside with a long coat and longer attention span. We had the circle. 3 seats facing Wolfe, Kramer angled to glare, yours truly at the globe with a notebook I didn't intend to use. Wolfe lifted a finger, and the room quieted as if a conductor had tapped his stand. "Harlan Vickers," he said, rolling the title like a coin, "constructed a fraught with Samuel Caldwell, shell accounts, transfers, balances that did not exist. Mr. Brant, you aided the concealment for money and fear. Ms. Harwood, you preserved records and departed the bank under a cloud. These are facts. They are not the question. The question is, who killed Vickers? Who killed the man in Bryant Park? Who killed Caldwell or made him disappear into the river, and who attempted to kill Miss Harwood and to steal from my window?" Harwood's smile was a scalpel. "You asked one question, Mr. Wolfe. That's 5. "One answer," Wolfe replied, "will suffice." Brant cleared his throat. "If you know it, say it." "I will," Wolfe said, after I put in order 3 items which individually seemed trifling, but together amount to a confession. He lifted the packet, the one I'd wrestled from a midnight sprinter, and tapped it. "First, type." "Type," Kramer barked. "Yes," Wolfe said. "The anonymous notes Vickers received months ago, the ones that drove him to panic, were typed. So was the warning left on my stoop last night. Call off tomorrow night. If Wolfe speaks, he dies." So were various memoranda in Vickers' files he kept close, typed not by the pool but personally. Those documents share a signature. Not handwriting, a typewriter. A chipped lowercase e light strikes on the R and a tendency for the T to print high on the line. A machine's fingerprint. Brant shot a glance at Miss Everett. Her knuckles whitened. Wolfe went on, gentle as thunder. Vickers' personal memoranda, typed after hours, were typed by his secretary on her own desk machine. So were the anonymous letters, and the note placed on my stoop. Miss Everett's voice was a thread. Mr. Wolfe, all the secretaries sometimes typed. Not on that machine, Wolfe said. On yours. I compared the characters this afternoon. Mr. Goodwin, the stoop note. I handed him the envelope. He slid out the single sheet and passed it to Kramer without looking. You will find the E is chipped in precisely the same way as the memoranda in the packet, and the letters Vickers saved, which he had foolishly tucked behind a ledger. You may bring a police expert tomorrow if you like. I do not require one. Kramer stared at the page, grunted, and swung his eyes to Miss Everett. If he'd had tusks, they'd have been gleaming. Wolfe raised a second finger. Second, the telephone voice. When I first summoned you 2 nights ago, a woman called this office during the meeting and said, if he calls the police with what he has, someone else will. Die tonight. Harwood's brow arched. You imply it was me? No, Wolfe said, almost bored. Miss Harwood chooses her words like she chooses her pearls, cold and exact. She says leverage, bargain, narrative. The caller used the bank's anxious grammar. Someone else will die, a phrase Miss Everett used in this office, breathless, when she said, they're destroying everyone who knew. It is not decisive, but it is consistent, and the call's timing, precisely when our discussion turned to the bank's exposure, required a listener with immediate knowledge of our progression. Miss Harwood was not home that night. Miss Everett was. Miss Everett clutched her bag. I never left the chair. You did not need to, Wolfe said. Arranging a timed call before you arrive is child's play. One asks the exchange to ring at a set minute and deliver a message. We live in a city of conveniences, Miss Everett. Kramer's mouth curled. Go on, genius. Wolfe raised a third finger. Third, contradiction. In this room, Inspector, a disembodied voice claimed, she's lying. Harwood killed him. Look at the files. The handwriting is hers. That was before this packet was opened in your sight, before any of us had examined the marginalia. Only 2 sorts of people could have made that call. Miss Harwood herself, or someone who had already seen the files and knew her hand was in the margins. Miss Harwood did not need to point to her own script. She would not. The person who would do so is one who had handled the pages while delivering anonymous letters to Vickers, one who typed, filed, and watched. A secretary. Miss Everett's lips moved. No sound came out. Harwood turned her head slightly, studying the secretary the way a hawk studies a field mouse. Brant sagged. Kramer jabbed the cigar at Wolfe. That's rhetoric, not handcuffs. Very well, Wolfe said, and his voice moved down a register. Miss Everett had more to lose than any of you. Mr. Brant, if exposed, is ruined. Miss Harwood, if exposed, is indicted but armed with leverage. But Miss Everett, she typed memoranda, moved ledgers, and, I suspect, did more than take dictation. The packet contains 2 transfer lists on off-hours carbon, with a second set in which numbers are altered. Subtly, cleverly. The alterations are not in Vickers' hand, nor Caldwell's, nor Miss Harwood's. The strokes are short, cramped, and the figure 2 has a small tick at the base, the way a typist who writes figures by hand on intake notes makes them. The person who rewrote those numbers is the same person who typed the threatening letters and the note on my stoop. His eyes opened fully now, heavy as millstones. Miss Everett, you were not a bystander. You were a participant. When Vickers wavered, when he told you he would clear his conscience, you panicked. Your future disappeared. Not money. Survival. You arranged for Vickers to be followed. And when he met with men near East 43rd, you were waiting with another exit and a gunman. Our witness in Bryant Park called me because you told him. You lured Mr. Goodwin to that park to measure how much we knew, and then you silenced your messenger with a shot. You met Caldwell through a chance schedule you controlled. When he began to fold, he became another liability. You had him steered to the river. Finally, when Miss Harwood entered the field with her files, you arranged a shot through her window to make her look pursued. She was, but also to tilt us toward believing your story. And when I announced I would speak tonight, you left the note on my stoop and placed a man outside this house to seize the packet. You were not counting on Mr. Goodwin's obstinacy. All eyes were on Miss Everett now. Her face had gone empty in the way faces do when the floor drops out and keeps on dropping. "That is fantasy," she whispered. "I'm a secretary." "You are a secretary," Wolfe said, "and a very good one. Good enough to keep a fraud alive for years and to think that killing men would keep it alive forever." He flicked a glance at Kramer. "Inspector, if you examine her desk machine at the bank, you will find the letter's signatures. If you search her apartment, you will find a second ribbon and a revolver with one barrel fouled from a shot fired in Bryant Park. She will not have disposed of it. She has had no time." Kramer was already on his feet, barking to the door, "Get me a squad car and a warrant." He rounded on Miss Everett. "Don't move." She moved anyway, but only her head, slowly toward Harwood. For a second, the timid mask fell and something sharp and tired looked out. "I kept you all afloat," she said, very quiet. "When Mr. Vickers ordered, I typed. When he lied, I corrected. When he promised me it would end, he meant he would end me to save himself. He told me, 'You'll be fine. Secretaries are invisible.'" Harwood's voice was a silk thread. "And so you made yourself visible with blood." Miss Everett's hands loosened on the bag. It thumped to the rug. "He was going to let it consume me. All of them were. You too." She pointed not at me, not at Brandt, but at the packet on Wolfe's desk. "Those pages, your margins, your initials, Mr. Brandt's countersignature. But the typing, always me. My machine, my hours, my life." He said he would confess. He meant he would give them my name. Kramer's men came to the door. He nodded to Saul, who stepped in long enough to watch Miss Everett with the patience of a saint and the reflexes of a streetcar. She didn't bolt. She sagged. Wolfe's voice gentled by half a shade. "Miss Everett, I mentioned 3 items. There is a 4th. Motive stated in your own words. When you came to Mr. Goodwin last night, you said, 'If I tell you, I'm as good as dead.' Not frightened hyperbole. A recognition. You believed the truth itself would kill you, so you killed the truth's messengers." She closed her eyes. When she opened them, the fight had gone. "I want a lawyer," she said. "You'll want 2, Kramer muttered. He jerked his chin at the uniforms. "Take her." They moved forward quietly, like men who had done it before. Miss Everett rose without a sound, a woman already halfway out of her own life, and went with them. The door shut. The brownstone breathed again. Brandt made a strangled sound and folded into his chair. "My God," he said. She, "Spare me the astonishment," Wolfe said. "You paid for silence and had no objections to the method so long as the checks cleared. You will return the hush money through an attorney of Inspector Kramer's choosing, testify to what you know, and resign before you are removed. If you are fortunate, your punishment will be professional disgrace rather than penal residence." Brandt swallowed. "Yes," he said. It came out like gravel. He rose and left without another syllable, a man suddenly acquainted with gravity. Harwood stood, smooth and composed. "And me, Mr. Wolfe." "You," Wolfe said, "will deliver copies of every page you own to the district attorney. You will make a clean breast of your involvement and accept whatever bargain a prosecutor deems just. If you attempt to profit, I will send Mr. Goodwin and Mr. Panzer to take the profit from your hide." Her smile returned. Thin this time, and real. Understood. She glanced at me. Mr. Goodwin, if you ever tire of Mr. Wolfe's chair, you're wasted. I like my chair, I told her. She slipped, Saul ghosting after her. Kramer lingered by the desk, eyeing Wolfe as if the big man might finally burst into flame. Well, he said at last, I don't know how you do it, but you do it. I'll confirm the typewriter and the gun. If they match, I'll send you a fruit basket. If they don't, I'll send you a subpoena. Send pears, Wolfe said. Bosk. Kramer snorted and stamped out. The house went quiet. The city's hum moved back to where it belonged, outside our walls. I closed the bolts and turned. Wolfe had not moved, but his eyes were closed in that way that means the job has stopped using his blood for fuel. Pears, I said. Bosk. Nice touch. He grunted. Do not prattle. Beer, I fetched one. He took a slow sip and some of the mass unknotted in his shoulders. So, I said, dropping into the red chair, we have a client who paid us and died. A secretary who killed to stay invisible. A manager who bought silent retail, and a lady with ledgers who decided to trade truth for safety. And you, sitting here like a lighthouse while the ships tried to ram you. Poetic twaddle, he said. Truth is not traded. It is complicated. Tonight it yielded. Let that hang a second. You sure you don't want me to swap the glass panes before the next evidence snatcher tries hand yoga? Tomorrow, he said. Fritz will prepare sweetbreads. We are finished. Finished? I echoed. What about the man in the park? Wolfe's eyes were slits. He was a runner, a minor functionary who thought a conscience could be sprinted into virtue. Miss Everett arranged for him. He was foolish enough to trust her to keep him alive. We will give Inspector Kramer his name in the morning. There is nothing left to do tonight but eat. From the kitchen, as if he had been waiting for the cue from Olympus, Fritz rang his small bell. Aromas began sneaking under the door, the kind that makes a man forget lead and blood and hard words. I stood, feeling the ache in my shoulder from last night's alleyway, and grinned at him. Sweetbreads, pears, and the moral order restored. You'll get soft again, boss. Phooey, he said. I was never otherwise. I went to the door and paused with my hand on the knob. One for the book, though. The Banker's Shadow. The shadow, he said, eyes closing with finality, was cast by a conscience too long delayed. Not a bad title, I said, and opened the door to the smell of dinner. If there was a new shadow on our stoop that night, we didn't see it. We had earned, for once, the luxury of not looking,